So when we created our user, we added those properties so that we can map them to a Spring user in the security context, right? So what we have to do now, we have to create another one last domain where we can map those values from this user to the actual Spring user that Spring needs to map all the security information like the password, the username, and if the account is locked or if the account is expired or if the user is enabled. So we have to actually, we can do it here. Like I can make this implement this user details that we need to implement, but it can get a little bit messy because we already have a bunch of things on here. So it makes sense that we create a separate class and then just map this class into that other class so that we can keep this one as clean as possible. So let's go back in the domain for one last time, and we're gonna create another class. In this class, let's call it user principal or something, because that's what Springs calls it, principal. So let's collapse this. So I want this to implement user details, which comes from Spring Security, and you can read here. You say it provides core user information and from a security perspective. So that's the one that we want. So it's an interface, so we need to implement all of those methods. Okay, so let's add those in. So as you can see, this user, which is gonna be mapped by our user, it needs to, it's the user that Spring Security is gonna need to do all the work that it needs to do. And it needs to know all of this information. So it needs to know the username, the password, the account, if it's expired, if the account is locked, or if the credentials aren't expired, or if the account is enabled. Okay, this information is coming from Spring Security. So I'm telling Spring Security what this information is, so that whenever I call on the security to pass me a user and I give him the username, I give Spring Security the username and the password, Spring Security will be able to map those values and determine if they're correct or not. So this is what this is doing. So for this, I'm just gonna go ahead and give it a user. So I'm gonna do private user. Okay, so I give it a user. That way I can pass that user to the constructor of this class. So every time I'm gonna construct a user principal, I can pass this user in the constructor every time. And then from there, from this user that I'm giving it, coming from our user, from this guy right here, because this is the guy we know about. This is the actual person in the real world, right? The actual user. And we know their username. We know their password. We're just going to take that information and pass it over to Spring Security. That's all we're doing. So I believe if I do alt insert, I can add a constructor with that user in it. So whenever I create a user principal, I can pass it this user right here. Okay. All right, so since I have this user, right, I can then give Spring Security all of this other information. So for instance, for the password, I can just say that user, which is the user that just passed in, this guy right here, and then I can get the password. Okay, and I can do the same for the username as well. So here I'm gonna say, hey, Spring Security, whenever you need the username for anyone, just use the user being passed. And this I'm gonna say false. I can leave that like that because I didn't define this. Like I'm not gonna use this in my application. I can if I want to. I can just add it in and then add it to the logic. But I just didn't use it this time, so I'm just gonna leave it to always be actually true. This should be true. If the account is non-expired, true, so that it doesn't fail when we try to log in. If we leave this as false, it will always fail regardless, because we return a hard-coded value. So is the account non-locked? Remember, when we define our user, we have is not locked. So whenever we're saving this user, let's say for the first time they create an account with in our application, so we can set this to false. so that whenever they try to log in, we can use that to build a logic in our application to say, hey, your account is locked on the first time you create your account with us. You need to verify an email, or you need to, I don't know, wait for an admin to give you permission to access the application. So you can see how you can build your entire logic using whatever you want to define. So I can say that is not locked. So that you can see why I name it not locked, because that's how Spring Security is mapping it, and that makes it easier for you to understand because they have the same name. Is credential non-expired true? So for instance, you can have a logic in your application that sets the credential expired for the user, and then, you know, for whatever reason you might want to do that. Maybe after like a few days you want their credential to expire so that they can create it again. Maybe that's a security concern for your company, and things like that. So here we're gonna do the same thing again. That is enabled, is active. So see, I could have called this is enabled, but I just called it is active. So once we have, this is always going to be true because we're not really using that, so we don't want Spring Security to stop us, say, hey, this user's credential expired. So we always say true because we're not using this for our logic, but we are using the is enable, which is when their account is active. And I'm going to show you how you can stop brute force attack with those values as well. So this is why I like to create a project when I'm teaching a course, because I think it's the best way to learn, like I said before. So you know, you can see this, you can go and read the documentation, you can go find some amazing blog on the internet, and you will see this, you will see things like this. I mean, it's not, it might not be like super detailed, or sometimes maybe they are. You know, I've seen some amazing tutorial on or blog on the internet, but you know, building a project from start to finish when you write all the code is really gonna solidify the knowledge in your head, and that's what we're trying to do here. Okay, so for this, it's gonna look for that user and get the value. The account is locked, same thing. For the username, same thing. For the password, same thing. For the granted authority, we're gonna do a similar thing. Now, if you remember, we have these authorities that we can get. So we can get those authorities and give them to Spring Security so that Spring Security will know what this user is allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. So we have to give Spring Security to say, hey, these are all the permissions that this user has. And with those permissions, let's say, for instance, I can have an endpoint to delete a user. And I can say, hey, this needs a user to have the authority of delete. So if they don't have that authority, they'll never be able to do it because Spring Security is aware of all the users and their permission. So I can't leave this null. I have to actually get the authorities from our user, which we're going to save in a database, and give them to Spring Security. So let's go ahead and do that. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Java 8, but I'm just going to use Java 8 stream. So let's do stream. Let's take this user, right? We need to get all the authorities, right? And we can take those authorities and map them. Let's go ahead and import stream. For some reason it's not importing, so I don't get IntelliSense. There we go, stream. Okay, so now I can have map, and what I want to do, so whenever I get all, so let me explain what I'm doing first before I type it out. So what I want to do is return any collection that extends granted authority. So what I'm doing right now, I take all of the user's authorities, which is going to be an array of string, and I'm going to map each one of them as a simple granted authority, which is a string. So I'm going to do simple granted authority, and I'm going to use method reference. So, so I'm creating a new simple granted authority, and we can go take a look at that. So let's control and click on it. You can see it extends granted authority. So that means that it's a valid thing to return here. It's a valid object to return because this is a collection of that extends any grant authority. And when you look at our simple grant authority, you can see that it implements the grant authority. So we can return that. And what we want to do, since this is a collection, we want to just collect all of this. So we can do that collect, and we call the collectors from stream.toList, because that's what it wants. So the only thing now, we just have to import map. We have to close this stream first. There. Oh, I have an extra. Okay, so here we are. So we're just gonna take all of these grant authorities, which is an array, a string array. We're just gonna take every single one of them. We're gonna create a new object of this class, and then we're just gonna collect them into a list of string. And that's all we have to do for this class. And again, this is not gonna be something that's gonna be saved in a database, so we don't need any entity or anything like that. We don't need the ID for it. We just have to give it that user, and then give it the information that it needs from our actual user. So that's what we have to do here. And I'll show you how we're going to use this information to lock the account when they try to access the account like 4 or 5 times in a row, like in the same 5 minutes range or something, whatever you want to define. And it's going to be very interesting, and you're going to see that.